Chapter 1. A Chance Encounter. The air was thick with the scent of rain-soaked earth, a lingering reminder of the morning downpour. Isabel walked along the tree-lined path through the park, her coat wrapped tightly around her against the lingering chill. The world around her seemed to glow, the sunlight filtering through the dense canopy of leaves, casting shifting patterns on the ground. She moved through the shadows and light, her steps quiet and measured, lost in her thoughts. In a city that often moved too fast, this park had always felt like a secret refuge, a place where time slowed and everything softened. Isabel cherished these walks, the way they allowed her to escape the bustle of her demanding life. But today, something felt different. There was a subtle charge in the air, as if a shift was waiting just beyond the next corner. As she crossed the small wooden bridge that arched over a gentle stream, her eyes caught sight of a figure leaning on the railing, his gaze lost in the rippling water below. He looked out of place among the worn paths and rustling leaves, his clothes crisp and neatly pressed, his posture carrying a certain elegance. Isabel hesitated, feeling a pull toward this stranger. It was a sensation she couldn't quite place, something deep and instinctive, urging her closer. She continued walking, the sound of her footsteps mingling with the rustle of wind-tossed leaves. As she drew nearer, she noticed the way the sunlight played on his dark hair, glinting with a hint of warmth. His profile was softened by the golden light, and for a moment, he seemed like a figure from another time, distant and untouchable. Yet there was a vulnerability in the way he stood, his shoulders slightly hunched, as if he bore a weight that was too heavy for one person alone. Isabel found herself slowing, her breath catching in her chest. She wondered what thoughts occupied his mind, what story lay hidden behind that distant expression. The thought came unbidden, a quiet curiosity that surprised her with its intensity. Just as she passed by, the stranger turned his head slightly, catching her eye. Their gazes locked, brief, unplanned, but charged with a sudden electricity. Isabel's heart stuttered, and she quickly averted her eyes, pretending to be absorbed in the movement of the stream. She felt a warmth rise to her cheeks, a rush of something unfamiliar and sweet, leaving her both uneasy and intrigued. She walked on, trying to shake off the feeling, but her mind kept circling back to that brief moment. She thought of his eyes, a shade of blue that seemed almost unreal in its clarity, like a piece of sky had broken away just for him. She wondered if he had noticed her reaction, if he had felt the same inexplicable connection. But she shook her head, telling herself that it was just a fleeting moment, a trick of the light, a chance encounter that would fade with the next turn of the path. Yet even as she tried to convince herself, Isabel found herself glancing back over her shoulder. The stranger had turned back to the stream, as if he had never seen her at all, but the moment lingered in the air between them, fragile and full of possibility. She walked on, each step carrying her further from the bridge. Yet the sensation of being seen, truly seen, stayed with her. The city resumed its hurried rhythm around her, cars passing, distant voices blending into the hum of the afternoon. But the park seemed to hold on to that brief connection, cradling it in its leafy embrace. And somewhere in the depths of her mind, a thought whispered softly, as if it had been waiting all along. Maybe, just maybe, some encounters are meant to change everything. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, casting longer shadows over the park, Isabel continued on her way, unaware of the path she had just stepped onto, a path that would lead her through joy and heartbreak, through love and loss, and toward a destiny she could never have imagined. Chapter 2. Whispers of Affection. Days turned into weeks, yet the memory of that chance encounter lingered in Isabel's mind, settling into the quiet corners of her thoughts. She would often find herself drawn back to the park, retracing her steps along the familiar path, hoping to catch another glimpse of the stranger by the stream. The air had grown colder, and the trees began to shed their leaves, creating a rust-colored blanket beneath her feet. On one such afternoon, as the sky wore a pale winter blue, Isabel found herself on the same wooden bridge where she had first seen him. She leaned against the railing, watching as the water moved slowly beneath her, carrying the fallen leaves downstream. She could not pinpoint why she felt so restless, as if a piece of her life had shifted slightly off course, and now she sought a way to align it again. Then, as if answering some unspoken wish, she spotted him. He was seated on a nearby bench, his face tilted up toward the dappled sunlight filtering through the bare branches above. There was a softness in his expression, a quiet reverence for the world around him. Isabel remained still, her pulse quickening, unsure whether to approach or keep her distance. Instead, she simply watched, letting her gaze wander over the way he seemed to blend with the tranquil scene. It was as if he belonged to this place, as much a part of the landscape as the ancient trees and winding paths. She wondered if he came here for the same reasons she did, to escape, to find solace in the simplicity of nature, to breathe more freely when the city's weight grew too heavy. Isabel soon found herself returning to the park more frequently, her visits taking on a new rhythm. She began to notice the small details of the changing season, the brittle crunch of frost underfoot, the way the late afternoon sun turned the world to amber. But no matter how much she tried to focus on the beauty around her, her thoughts would inevitably drift back to the stranger who seemed to share her quiet haven. One crisp morning, she arrived earlier than usual, the mist still clinging to the ground. To her surprise, he was already there, standing beneath a large oak tree. He was reading a book, his brow furrowed in concentration, and for a moment, Isabel felt like an intruder in his solitude. But then she saw it. How he would pause now and then, lifting his gaze from the page to watch the sun filter through the thinning branches, a faint smile tugging at the corners of his mouth. She couldn't help but mirror his expression, a small smile of her own spreading across her lips. It felt like they were sharing something unspoken, a thread of understanding weaving between them, even from a distance. And though they never exchanged a word, those moments together in the park felt like a conversation in themselves. Each glance, each lingering look, filled with meaning. Days flowed by like the stream beneath the bridge, each one blending into the next. Sometimes, she would find him already there when she arrived, and other times, she would catch sight of him leaving just as she approached. She never tried to speak to him, content to let their connection remain unvoiced, like a secret shared between two souls who understood the language of silence. In time, the park became their unspoken meeting place, a stage for their wordless exchanges. Isabel began to bring her sketchbook, capturing the graceful lines of the trees, the gentle arc of the bridge, and, sometimes, the shadowed outline of his figure against the landscape. She filled the pages with glimpses of their quiet moments, the way he stood in contemplation, or the way the light touched his face when he turned toward the sun. And as the sketches grew, so did a warmth in her chest, a new and unexpected feeling that she could not quite name. It was more than simple curiosity now, something deeper, more intricate, like a soft whisper of affection that fluttered through her mind when she thought of him. On one particularly cold afternoon, she noticed a change in their silent routine. He had left a small notebook on the bench, the wind threatening to scatter its pages. Isabel hesitated, then approached it, her fingers brushing against the worn leather cover. She picked it up carefully, feeling its weight in her hands, and for a moment, she wondered about the thoughts that might be inscribed inside. Words that he might have never intended for anyone else to see. But then she placed it back on the bench, resisting the temptation to look deeper into his world. She stepped back, feeling the ache of unsaid words, a sense of something just beyond her reach. Yet she could not bring herself to cross that unspoken boundary. Instead, she left the park that day with a lingering sense of yearning, her mind filled with the possibility of what might have been written between those pages. And as the last light of day faded into twilight, Isabel realized that she had begun to look forward to these quiet afternoons more than she cared to admit. She found herself wondering where he went after he left the park, what kind of life he returned to beyond the trees and the winding paths. She imagined him carrying the same feeling she held close to her chest, a sense of connection that defied words. But even as the leaves fell and winter crept closer, she could not shake the feeling that their time in the park was like the changing season, beautiful but fleeting, destined to change with the shifting winds. And though she had yet to understand the full shape of her own emotions, she knew that they had become as much a part of her life as the rhythm of her breath. In the distance, the city continued its relentless pace, but here, in their quiet refuge, Isabel and the stranger remained like two ships that drifted near each other in the night, never touching, yet bound by a thread that seemed to grow more delicate with each passing day. Chapter 3. Beneath the Autumn Sky. As autumn stretched on, the air grew sharper, and the days shortened, the park transforming into a landscape of deep reds and golden hues. The trees, once thick with foliage, now let the sun pour through their sparse branches, casting long shadows across the ground. Isabel wrapped herself in layers against the cold, but her cheeks still turned pink with each gust of wind that swept through the park. Yet, she kept coming, driven by a pull she could no longer deny. Each visit felt like slipping into a familiar dream. She would arrive, her heart fluttering with anticipation, and more often than not, she would find him there, the same figure who had become a fixture in the quiet corners of her life. He sat on the bench or leaned against the bridge, his presence as constant as the turning of the leaves. Sometimes he read, other times he seemed lost in his own thoughts, his gaze wandering over the landscape that had grown colder with the season. Isabel continued to sketch, finding inspiration in the ever-changing scenery and the stranger who had come to inhabit her thoughts. Her pencil captured the play of shadows on his face, the curve of his smile when he thought no one was watching, the way he would close his eyes and breathe in the crisp air as if savoring each moment. Her sketchbook filled with these quiet portraits, a private collection of stolen glimpses and unspoken moments. One afternoon, she arrived to find him standing at the edge of the lake that lay beyond the trees, its surface smooth as glass beneath the pale autumn sky. She approached slowly, her footsteps muffled by the carpet of fallen leaves, watching as he tossed a stone into the water. It skipped once, twice, before sinking into the depths, sending ripples across the mirrored surface. Isabel found herself mesmerized by the way the circles widened, distorting the reflection of the overcast sky above. She stopped a few paces behind him, close enough to see the tension in his shoulders, the way he seemed to carry the weight of his thoughts. He stood there for a long time, his hands in his pockets, as if the cold no longer bothered him. The sky above was a canvas of shifting gray, heavy with the promise of rain, but the air held a kind of clarity that made every detail stand out sharply. The breath that clouded in front of his face, the rustling of dry leaves at his feet, the soft murmur of the lake. For the first time, Isabel felt a sense of melancholy settle over her, a realization that perhaps she was watching something fragile and transient, like the leaves that fell from the trees with each passing day. She wondered what thoughts weighed on him so heavily, what memories he carried that seemed to tether him to this place. It was a question that stayed with her, growing like a shadow in the corners of her mind. As the weeks passed, their unspoken connection deepened, each visit to the park feeling like a chapter in a story that neither of them could read in full. They would cross paths near the lake, their eyes meeting for a moment before drifting apart, both of them pretending not to notice the silent tension that thickened the air between them. Sometimes, when he lingered on the bridge or paused beneath a tree, she felt a flutter of hope, as if he might finally turn and approach her. But he never did, and she found herself grateful and disappointed all at once. Yet beneath that uncertainty, there was a comfort in their silent companionship, a rhythm to the way their lives seemed to orbit around each other, even without direct contact. Isabel found herself thinking of him at odd times. When she stood in line at the coffee shop, when she walked home through the early evening dark, when she lay awake at night, staring at the ceiling as the sounds of the city hummed through her window. She imagined what his voice might sound like, whether it would be soft and contemplative or rich with a hidden warmth. But these thoughts only left her feeling more alone, more aware of the distance that remained between them. One day, the first snow of the season began to fall. It was gentle at first, thin flakes drifting down from the leaden sky, transforming the park into a landscape of white. Isabel arrived at her usual time, her boots crunching on the freshly fallen snow. She half expected that he wouldn't be there, that the cold would have kept him away, but as she reached the clearing by the lake, she saw him standing by the frozen shore, his dark coat stark against the pale world. He seemed lost in the quiet beauty of the moment, his breath puffing out in soft clouds as he watched the snow drift down. For a while, Isabel stood back, watching the snow settle into his hair, imagining how cold he must be. She wanted to offer him warmth somehow, to bridge the distance between them, but she remained rooted to the spot, her hands buried deep in her coat pockets. Eventually, he turned and walked away, his footsteps leaving a trail through the unbroken snow. Isabel waited until he had disappeared into the trees before she approached the place where he had stood. She traced the outline of his footprints with her own, feeling a strange connection in following the path he had left behind. The snow fell steadily, each flake melting on her skin, and she couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was slipping away from her, as ephemeral as the season itself. She lingered by the frozen lake, watching as the snow softened the edges of the world, erasing the lines between sky and earth. For the first time, she allowed herself to think about what it would mean if she never saw him again. If their wordless meetings came to an end with the turn of the weather, leaving only the memory of those quiet afternoons to fill the space he had left behind. And as she stood beneath the pale autumn sky, Isabel understood that some connections, no matter how brief, leave a mark that cannot easily be erased. She turned back toward the path, her heart heavy with the weight of all that remained unsaid, and she walked through the falling snow, carrying with her the unspoken ache of something that might have been. Chapter 4. The Space Between Us. As winter settled fully over the city, the park became a realm of muted tones, where shadows stretched longer in the pale winter light. The paths that had once been alive with the colors of autumn were now blanketed in snow, each step crunching underfoot, leaving behind crisp impressions that quickly blurred with the wind's breath. The trees stood bare, skeletal against the soft gray sky, and the lake, once flowing, lay silent beneath a thick layer of ice. Isabel continued her visits to the park, but her anticipation had taken on a new edge. She arrived each time with a quiet hope, scanning the landscape for his familiar figure. Yet more often than not, she found herself alone, her breath clouding in the air as she walked the now deserted trails. On those days, she would pause by the bridge or the frozen lake, her thoughts drifting back to the memory of his presence. How he had stood, unmoving, like a dark shape cut out against the snow. She told herself that it was foolish to feel this absence so keenly, that she had no reason to miss someone she had never truly known. But the feeling persisted, stubborn and unyielding, curling around her heart like ivy on a cold stone wall. She wondered if he had simply decided that the weather was too harsh, If he had chosen warmth and comfort over the biting wind and snow-laden trees, it would have made sense. But there was a part of her that feared something else, that he had left entirely, moved on without leaving a trace behind, and that the connection she had imagined was nothing more than a thread woven from her own longing. On the days when he did appear, it felt like a reprieve. He would arrive later than usual, wrapped in a heavy coat, his face flushed from the cold. Isabel kept her distance, but she could not help the small spark of warmth that flared in her chest whenever she saw him again, a sensation that spread through her like the first light of dawn over a winter horizon. He seemed more distant than before, his eyes shadowed with a heaviness that had not been there during the autumn days. She caught glimpses of him standing by the edge of the frozen lake, his expression turned inward, as if he were searching for something beneath the ice that lay beyond the reach of sight. It was on one such afternoon that Isabel ventured closer, drawn by a curiosity she could no longer ignore. She lingered at a distance, leaning against a snow-covered tree, watching as he stared out across the lake. He held a small object in his hands, turning it over slowly, as if the motion could unlock some hidden memory. Isabel squinted through the gray light, trying to discern its shape. A photograph, perhaps, or a worn piece of jewelry, but she was too far away to see it clearly. She studied his face, trying to read the story behind the lines that creased his brow, the sadness that tugged at his mouth. For the first time, she wondered what kind of life he had lived before they crossed paths in this silent, snow-covered world. She imagined a past filled with its own losses, its own buried hopes, and the thought made her feel strangely closer to him, as if they were bound by the same invisible thread of longing. But then, just as she began to imagine taking a step closer, he slipped the object back into his coat pocket and turned away, his breath clouding in the air as he walked back toward the path. Isabel remained behind, feeling the emptiness of the space he left behind, the silence that settled around her like the falling snow. She watched until he disappeared among the trees, her thoughts swirling like the wind that tugged at her scarf, as if urging her to follow. She returned to the same spot the next day and the day after that, hoping that their paths might cross again, but he did not appear. The snow piled higher, covering the benches and the bridge, erasing the traces of his footsteps that she had once followed so carefully. Isabel began to carry his absence with her, like a stone in her pocket, a weight that pressed against her whenever she found herself alone in the park. One evening, as dusk fell early over the city, she stood by the edge of the lake, staring at the reflection of the first stars breaking through the twilight sky. The ice beneath her feet creaked with the shifting temperature, sending a hollow echo across the still air. She thought about the secrets that the lake might hold beneath its frozen surface, the stories hidden beneath the snow-covered ground, and how some things remained buried no matter how deeply one wished to uncover them. She reached into her own coat pocket, pulling out her sketchbook, and turned to the page where she had drawn him that first time. The lines were delicate, capturing the way he had stood by the stream, his form blending with the trees that swayed overhead. She traced the outline of his face with her fingertip, the pencil marks smudging slightly under her touch, and she felt a pang of something she could not quite name, a yearning for a moment that had never truly belonged to her. Closing the sketchbook, Isabel tucked it back into her coat and took a deep breath of the cold, biting air. She knew she could not stay much longer. The sun had dipped below the horizon, and darkness was settling over the park. Yet she found herself hesitating, turning one last time toward the shadows among the trees, hoping for a glimpse of movement, a sign that he might appear once more. But there was only the silence, deep and unbroken, stretching out like the space between stars. She shivered, drawing her coat tighter around her, and finally turned away, her footsteps crunching over the snow-covered path. She did not look back, but as she walked through the gathering night, She carried with her the ache of all the words she had never spoken, all the possibilities that had drifted away with the changing seasons. The night sky above was clear, the stars sharp and bright against the darkness, and Isabel wondered if he too was looking up at the same sky, feeling the same distance that stretched between them. She allowed herself to imagine it for a moment, a thought that shimmered like the frost on the branches, delicate and easily broken. Then, with a sigh, she continued on, her footsteps leading her back to the city's lights, leaving behind the frozen echoes of a connection that had begun to fade like breath against glass. Chapter 5. Between Heartbeats. Winter deepened, and the park settled into a profound stillness. The snow, undisturbed by footsteps, formed a soft, unbroken layer that covered the pathways and blanketed the bare trees. Isabel continued her solitary visits, finding solace in the quiet embrace of the cold season. She wrapped herself in scarves and mittens, her breath misting the air as she navigated the snow-covered trails. Each time she arrived, she found herself hoping against hope that she might catch a glimpse of him again, that their paths might intersect one last time before the snow melted and winter gave way to spring. But the days passed, and the familiar silhouette she longed for never emerged from the shadows. The park, once a place of connection and quiet company, felt emptier than ever, its silence deeper than the blanket of snow. Isabel spent hours sitting on the same bench where she had once sketched him, her fingers stiff with cold as she flipped through the pages of her sketchbook. She lingered over the drawings of him, tracing the lines of his face, the curve of his shoulders, the way he leaned against the bridge as if he belonged there, as if he had always been a part of that landscape. Yet, despite the ache of absence, there was something about the winter's solitude that wrapped around her like a comforting shroud. The snow muffled every sound, turning the city's usual noise into a distant murmur, leaving only the crunch of her boots and the occasional rustle of wind through the skeletal branches. She found herself wandering deeper into the park, exploring paths she had never taken before, as if hoping that some hidden corner might reveal the answers she sought. But the park remained a mystery, its secrets buried beneath layers of snow and ice. One morning, she arrived earlier than usual, the sun still low in the sky, casting a pale light that shimmered over the frosted ground. The air was sharp with cold, and her breath hung in the air like a ghostly cloud. She walked with her hands shoved deep into her coat pockets, her steps slow and measured, the snow crunching rhythmically beneath her feet. Her thoughts drifted back to the days of autumn, when the park had been vibrant with color and possibility, when she had felt that silent connection like a thread drawing her toward him. She wondered how such a fleeting bond could leave such a lasting impression, how the presence of a stranger could become so intricately woven into the fabric of her days. As she approached the frozen lake, she paused, noticing a set of footprints leading off the main path. They were fresh, the snow still crisp around their edges, as if they had been made not long before her arrival. Her heart quickened, and she followed the trail, each step bringing a renewed sense of anticipation. The footprints wound through the trees, leading her toward a secluded part of the park where the underbrush grew thick and the trees crowded together, their bare branches casting tangled shadows over the snow. Isabel's breath hitched as she rounded a corner and saw him standing there, his figure silhouetted against the pale light. He was bundled in a heavy coat, a woolen hat pulled low over his ears, but there was no mistaking the curve of his shoulders, the familiar tilt of his head. He stood at the edge of a clearing, his back turned to her, staring out over a part of the lake that had remained untouched by the day's thin sunlight. For a long moment, she simply watched him, too afraid to move closer, too caught up in the sudden rush of relief that swept through her. It was as if the world had righted itself, as if a missing piece had fallen back into place. The cold air burned in her lungs, and she tried to steady her breathing, feeling the delicate balance of the moment, the space between them both heavy and fragile. He did not turn to look at her, but she could sense the tension in his posture, the way he seemed to be listening to something beyond the silence of the park. His hands were clenched at his sides, his head slightly bowed, as if he were lost in thought. Isabel took a cautious step closer, the snow crunching beneath her feet. But as she moved, he seemed to stiffen, his breath forming a sharp cloud in the air. And before she could take another step, he turned and began to walk away, leaving behind a line of footprints that cut through the snow. Isabel stood frozen, watching as his figure receded into the distance, swallowed up by the shadowy trees. She felt the sudden urge to call out, to break the silence that had defined their connection, but the words lodged in her throat, unspoken. Instead, she followed after him, her steps quickening as she tried to match his pace. The snow whipped around her, stinging her cheeks, but she pressed on, determined to keep him in sight, to close the distance between them. She followed the trail of his footprints as they wound through the trees, her pulse racing with a sense of urgency she could not quite understand. She imagined catching up to him, reaching out a hand to touch his shoulder, to finally see the expression in his eyes when he turned to face her. But the path twisted and turned, and each time she thought she might close the gap, he seemed to slip further away, his figure growing smaller against the backdrop of winter trees. At last, she emerged into a small clearing, the snow-covered ground stretching out in all directions. The footprints she had been following came to an abrupt stop near the base of a tall oak tree, its branches bare against the sky. She looked around, scanning the shadows for any sign of movement, but the clearing was empty, save for the marks left behind in the snow. It was as if he had vanished, leaving behind only the impression of his passing. Isabel walked forward, her footsteps crunching softly as she reached the spot where his trail ended. She knelt down, tracing the edge of the final footprint with her gloved hand, feeling the chill seep through the fabric. The snow around it was undisturbed, no sign of where he might have gone, as if he had simply melted into the winter air. She stood up slowly, turning in a circle, her breath clouding around her, and a sense of loss settled over her, cold and heavy as the snow. She lingered in the clearing for a long time, listening to the wind as it whispered through the branches, carrying the distant sound of the city beyond the park. The ache in her chest deepened, a hollow space where hope had once lived, and she realized that some mysteries could not be solved, that some connections might only exist for a season before slipping away like snowflakes in the breeze. Finally, she turned back toward the path, her steps slow and heavy as she retraced her way through the trees. She did not know if she would find him again, if their lives would cross once more before winter's end, but as she walked through the deepening dusk, she carried with her the memory of his presence, the sense of something fragile and unfinished that lingered in the quiet spaces between the trees. The night settled in, the sky a dark expanse of stars, and Isabel followed the trail back toward the city's glow, her heart burdened with the weight of what might have been. She knew she would return to the park the next day, and the day after that, because some part of her could not let go of the hope that beneath the snow, beneath the silence, something still waited to be found. Chapter 6. A Glimpse of Forever. The winter days continued their slow, quiet march forward, each one blending into the next with a sameness that was both comforting and stifling. The city seemed to hold its breath under the weight of snow, the streets lined with piles of white that blurred the edges of the buildings and muffled the usual noise. Isabel found herself retreating further into the solitude of her thoughts, spending more time within the park's frozen embrace, drawn back each day by the possibility, however faint, that she might catch a glimpse of him again. She wandered the paths that had become so familiar to her, the snow crunching beneath her boots in a rhythmic cadence, her breath forming clouds that lingered in the frigid air. The bridge, the frozen lake, the secluded trails among the trees. Each spot held a memory of his presence, a sense of him that lingered like an echo, just beyond reach. She imagined him standing by the water's edge or leaning against the bridge railing, his gaze distant and lost in thoughts she could not fathom. She imagined the curve of his mouth, the furrow in his brow, the way he had once turned his head slightly, as if sensing her presence nearby. But the days slipped by, and he did not appear. Isabel began to wonder if she had simply dreamed him, if their brief encounters had been nothing more than a trick of the winter light, a mirage conjured by her own loneliness. Yet, even as these doubts crept in, she could not let go of the hope that somewhere beneath the snow-covered surface of the park, the thread that had connected them still remained, waiting to be picked up again. One morning, a heavy snowfall blanketed the city, transforming the park into a pristine world of white. The trees wore crowns of snow, and the lake's frozen surface gleamed beneath a fresh layer of powder. Isabel arrived early, before the sun had fully risen, the sky tinged with the faint pink light of dawn. She made her way slowly through the park, her footsteps leaving a solitary trail through the untouched snow, her breath rising in steady plumes. The air was still, the kind of silence that held the promise of something hidden beneath its surface. As she walked along the edge of the frozen lake, a glimmer of movement caught her eye, a shadow flitting between the trees on the far side of the water. Her heart quickened, and she turned, straining to see through the curtain of falling snow. For a moment, she thought she saw him, a dark shape against the pale landscape, moving slowly among the snow-laden branches. She took a step forward, the snow crunching loudly beneath her feet, but when she blinked, the shadow was gone, leaving only the swirling flakes and the quiet murmur of the wind. Isabel's breath caught in her chest, a feeling of urgency rising within her. She hurried along the lake's edge, her boots slipping on the icy patches beneath the snow, her eyes scanning the treeline for any sign of movement. She reached the spot where she thought she had seen him, but the ground was undisturbed, the snow smooth and unbroken. She turned in a slow circle, her pulse thudding in her ears, but there was nothing. Only the empty park stretching out before her, the trees standing like silent sentinels. Frustration and a deep, aching sadness welled up inside her, mingling with the sharp bite of the cold. She sank down onto a nearby bench, the wood hard and icy beneath her, and buried her face in her gloved hands. She felt the weight of all the questions that had gone unanswered, the sense of loss that pressed down on her like the snow-covered branches overhead. She thought of the object he had held in his hands that day by the lake, the way he had turned it over so carefully, as if it held a secret he could not let go of. She wondered what it was, what story lay hidden within its worn surface, and why he had carried it with such tenderness. As she sat there, the snowfall thickening around her, she reached into her own coat pocket and pulled out her sketchbook. She flipped through the pages, pausing on the drawings she had made of him, the lines etched into the paper with a precision born of careful observation. Each sketch held a fragment of the connection she had felt. His figure standing by the bridge, the curve of his jaw, the shadows that clung to him like a second skin. She lingered over one particular drawing, where she had captured him looking out over the water, his expression distant and wistful, as if he were seeing something beyond the horizon. She closed the sketchbook with a sigh, pressing it against her chest, feeling the rough edges of the pages beneath her fingers. The snow fell heavier, collecting on her coat, her hat, her eyelashes, until the world around her seemed to blur into a white haze. She tilted her head back, letting the flakes melt against her skin, feeling their cold, fleeting touch. There was a strange beauty in this emptiness, in the way the snow covered everything, smoothing out the sharp edges and leaving behind a blank slate. Yet, beneath that beauty, she could feel the ache of something missing, the absence that had grown larger with each passing day. Eventually, she rose from the bench, brushing the snow from her coat, and made her way back toward the city's lights, her steps slower than before. The park receded behind her, the trees fading into shadows as the sky lightened with the approach of morning. Isabel glanced back once, hoping for a final glimpse of the figure she had chased through the snow, but there was nothing, only the silent landscape, untouched and unbroken. In the days that followed, Isabel tried to push away the memory of that shadow among the trees, but it lingered in her mind like a stubborn dream. She found herself returning to the park again and again, following the same paths, her eyes always searching the distance, even as she tried to tell herself that it was time to move on. The snow began to melt, the edges of the lake softening as winter loosened its grip, and yet the memory of that fleeting movement, that brief hope, held fast within her. Spring crept in slowly, bringing with it the first hints of green, the sound of birdsong returning to the trees. The ice on the lake cracked and shifted, revealing dark water beneath, and the air grew warmer, the snow shrinking away to reveal patches of earth and dead leaves. Isabel walked the paths that she had once shared with him, feeling the change in the air, the way the park seemed to come alive again, shedding its winter coat. Yet, as the world around her shifted toward renewal, she felt a strange reluctance to let go of the quiet, frozen days when she had waited for him beneath the snow-covered branches. One evening, as she stood by the thawing lake, watching the sun dip below the horizon in a wash of pale gold, she slipped her sketchbook back into her coat and made a promise to herself. She would keep coming back, as long as the hope remained, as long as she believed that their paths might cross again. She would hold on to the memory of those quiet moments, even as the world around her moved forward. And perhaps one day, when the snow returned and the park once again lay shrouded in white, she would find him there, waiting for her as he had before. Until then, she would carry the echoes of those winter days within her, the memories of a connection that had been as fleeting as a breath in the cold air. And in the silence that followed her footsteps through the park, she would listen for the whispers of what might still be hidden beneath the snow and the shadows. Chapter 7. Falling Through the Cracks. The air grew warmer with the approach of spring, the city shedding its heavy winter coat and trading the silence of snow for the hum of new life. Trees that had stood bare and skeletal for months began to show signs of renewal, tiny buds unfurling on their branches. The lake, no longer imprisoned by ice, rippled under the touch of a gentle breeze, its surface reflecting the sky's shifting shades of blue. Isabel found herself lingering in the park even more, drawn to the contrast between the world's slow awakening and the lingering chill she felt deep within herself. With each visit, she traced the familiar paths around the lake, her gaze drawn to the places where the shadows had once seemed to shift and move. The bridge, the trees along the shore, and the secluded bench where she had sketched through winter's chill, each held a sense of déjà vu, a pull that kept her returning day after day. She walked those paths with a quiet persistence, carrying her sketchbook under her arm, its worn edges a reminder of the moments she had captured within its pages. One afternoon, she reached the spot where the ice had finally broken, leaving behind a patch of open water that lapped gently against the shore. The air was still cool, but the sun shone brightly, casting long, wavering reflections across the lake's surface. Isabel knelt beside the water, her knees sinking into the damp ground as she gazed into the dark depths below. It felt like a window into another world, the kind of place where hidden things might rest, undisturbed and waiting to be discovered. As she crouched there, a faint gleam caught her eye, a flash of something just beneath the surface, half buried in the mud at the lake's edge. She reached out instinctively, her fingers breaking the water's surface, and pulled out a small, waterlogged object. It was a pocket watch, its face dulled and obscured by a layer of grime. the chain tangled in clumps of dead leaves. The metal was cold against her skin, and as she turned it over, she noticed a faint engraving on the back, a pair of initials just barely legible beneath the tarnish. Isabel sat back on her heels, her breath catching in her chest as she studied the watch more closely. The initials were unfamiliar, but there was something about the watch that felt strangely familiar, as if it had been waiting for her to find it all along. She wiped away some of the mud, revealing the glass face beneath, though the hands inside had long stopped moving, frozen at some forgotten moment in time. She slipped the watch into her pocket, her mind buzzing with questions she couldn't quite put into words. The presence of the watch felt like a piece of a puzzle she had been trying to assemble for months, a clue hidden within the ordinary landscape of the park. Had it been his, dropped in some moment of carelessness, or was it simply another artifact left behind by the passing of time? As she stood up, her eyes swept across the lake's surface, but the water revealed no further secrets, only the faint ripples of the breeze. She made her way back to her apartment that evening, her thoughts tangled around the mystery of the watch. Her home, so familiar in its quiet solitude, seemed to hold a new tension, as if the air itself was charged with unspoken questions. She placed the watch on her small desk, beside her stack of sketches, and turned on the lamp. The light cast a warm glow across the cluttered surface, illuminating the lines she had drawn over the winter. Lines that had tried to capture the fleeting impressions of a face, a presence she could never quite pin down. As she studied the watch, she wondered if it might hold some hidden story, a tale of loss or longing that she could not yet understand. She turned it over in her hands, feeling the weight of it, the way it seemed to hold time itself in suspension. The initials, too faint to read in the dim light, nagged at her, as if they held a key to the connection she had sensed with him. She thought of him standing by the lake, his gaze distant, as if looking beyond the present moment into something she couldn't see. In the days that followed, Isabel carried the watch with her whenever she returned to the park, slipping it into her pocket as if it were a talisman. She felt its weight as she walked the trails, a constant reminder of the questions she could not answer. She would pause by the lake, tracing the contours of its worn surface with her thumb, imagining the story it might hold, imagining his hand, too, holding it once, with the same sense of curiosity and wonder. The park changed with the advancing season, new shoots pushing up through the soil, the air filled with the scent of damp earth and budding leaves. Birds returned to the branches overhead, filling the mornings with their songs, and the lake's waters grew clearer, reflecting the sky's shifting moods. Yet, even as the world around her shifted towards spring, Isabel found herself clinging to the last remnants of winter, to the memory of those snow-covered days when the world had felt smaller and more intimate, when the possibility of seeing him had seemed almost tangible. She would sit on the bench where she had often sketched, the pocket watch resting beside her as she watched the play of light and shadow across the water. She thought about the moments they had shared, the way his presence had lingered just at the edge of her awareness, like a whisper carried by the wind. She wondered what had drawn him to the park, why he had come to stand by the lake's edge day after day, his thoughts hidden beneath the surface of his expression. And she wondered, too, if he had left the watch behind deliberately, as if to mark a place where their paths had crossed, however briefly. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Isabel decided to explore a part of the park she had rarely visited, a secluded grove of trees on the far side of the lake, where the shadows deepened as twilight approached. The air was cooler here, the canopy overhead filtering the fading light into a patchwork of gold and shadow. She made her way carefully along the narrow path, her footsteps softened by the layers of fallen leaves and pine needles underfoot. The grove held a sense of quiet, as if time moved more slowly within its bounds. Isabel paused at the base of an old oak, its gnarled roots reaching out like fingers, and leaned against its rough bark. She pulled out the pocket watch, feeling the cool metal against her palm, and lifted it to catch the last rays of sunlight that filtered through the branches. For a moment, she held it there, suspended between light and shadow, feeling as if she were on the cusp of some revelation, some deeper truth hidden beneath the layers of time. As the light faded, casting long shadows across the grove, Isabel felt a sudden chill, a sense that she was not alone. She turned, scanning the underbrush, but saw only the dark shapes of trees, the last of the sun's glow slipping below the horizon. Yet, the feeling lingered, an unshakable sense that something watched her from just beyond the reach of her sight, hidden among the shadows. She tucked the watch back into her pocket and hurried back to the familiar paths, the weight of the grove's silence trailing behind her like a shadow. By the time she reached the park's edge, the sky had deepened to a rich blue, the first stars appearing above the city's skyline. She glanced back toward the grove one last time, her heart beating a little faster, her mind filled with the lingering sense that there were still secrets buried within the park's quiet corners, secrets that waited for her to uncover them. As she walked home through the gathering dusk, she clutched the pocket watch tightly in her hand, its weight grounding her amidst the swirl of questions and the growing unease. And though she could not see it yet, she felt the edges of something shifting, something stirring beneath the surface of the ordinary, as if the story she had been searching for was beginning to reveal itself, piece by piece, in the quiet spaces between her steps. Chapter 8. The distance between them. The days grew longer, the sun lingering in the sky until late evening, casting a warm glow over the city. Spring had fully settled in, painting the landscape with shades of green and bursts of color from blossoming flowers. Isabel continued her routine walks through the park, her sketchbook under her arm, and the pocket watch tucked safely in her coat pocket. But with each passing day, a subtle distance crept between her memories of the stranger by the lake and the reality she faced in her solitude. She often wandered to the far edge of the park where the secluded grove lay hidden among the older trees. Something about the quietude of that place pulled at her, a place where the light filtered through the leaves in dappled patterns, where the air smelled of damp earth and pine needles. She would sit on a fallen log, tracing the initials on the back of the watch with her fingertips, feeling the roughness of the engraving beneath the tarnish. Her thoughts drifted to the stranger she had watched from afar, wondering where he had gone and why he had disappeared so suddenly from the edges of her life. At home, her sketches had taken on a new intensity. She filled page after page with the same figure, tall, with features that were always just out of reach, blurred and softened by the passage of time. She tried to capture the look in his eyes, the way his posture hinted at secrets unspoken, but each attempt fell short, leaving her with the frustrating sense that she was trying to hold onto something that was slipping through her fingers. Her small apartment, once a sanctuary, now felt stifling with the weight of all the unanswered questions she carried. One evening, she took the pocket watch apart on her kitchen table, hoping to find some hidden message or clue inside. The watch's mechanisms, delicate and intricate, lay exposed beneath the lamplight, their tiny gears and springs like the inner workings of a mind that she could not quite comprehend. She turned each piece over in her hands, examining every scratch and dent, but the watch remained silent, revealing nothing of its past. The initials stared back at her, stubbornly mute, and she felt the ache of frustration settle deeper into her chest. Outside, the city buzzed with the sounds of nightlife, the energy of spring drawing people out into the streets and parks. Laughter echoed from a nearby cafe, mingling with the distant hum of traffic, but it only served to remind Isabel of the quiet she carried within her, the space that had grown between her and the world beyond her window. She often watched the city lights from her apartment, wondering if he too looked out over the same skyline, if he too felt the distance between them widening like the gap between the hands of a clock. On one of her late-night walks, she ventured further into the park than usual, her footsteps quiet on the gravel path. The air was cool, carrying the scent of freshly turned soil and blooming magnolias, the stars faint against the glow of the city. She followed the winding trail through the trees, deeper into the darkness, until she reached the grove where she had found the watch. There, she paused, listening to the rustling of the leaves and the soft murmur of the lake in the distance. The shadows seemed to shift around her, as if something unseen moved just beyond her vision. She knelt by the roots of the ancient oak, pressing her hands into the damp earth, and closed her eyes, trying to imagine what might have brought him here, why he had chosen this place. She thought of the moments when their paths had intersected, the brief glimpses of his figure in the distance, and the way he had seemed to fade into the landscape like a ghost. She wondered if he too had felt the pull of this place, if he had left the watch behind as a way of marking his presence, a breadcrumb trail that she alone had chosen to follow. As she sat in the shadows of the grove, the distance between them felt like a living thing, growing and shifting with each passing moment. It was as if time itself had conspired to keep them apart, weaving their lives together for a brief instant before pulling them in opposite directions. She felt the weight of it in her chest, a heaviness that pressed down on her as she gazed up through the canopy at the thin slice of moon hanging in the sky. Her thoughts drifted, tangled in the quietude of the night and the steady rhythm of her own heartbeat. She stayed in the grove until the cold crept into her bones, until the moon had climbed higher and the stars shone brighter. The pocket watch lay in her lap, its empty face reflecting the faint glow of the sky. She turned it over in her hands, tracing the initials one last time before tucking it back into her coat. Then she rose, brushing the dirt from her hands, and made her way back through the park, following the path she had carved for herself over these months of wandering. In the days that followed, Isabel felt a growing sense of unease, as if the world around her had shifted in some subtle way. She found herself scanning the faces of strangers she passed on the street, searching for some sign of recognition, some hint that might lead her back to him. But the faces remained unfamiliar, their expressions closed off, and the city continued its ceaseless motion, indifferent to her quiet search. She tried to lose herself in her art, but even the act of drawing had lost its comfort, the sketches blurring together into a mass of unfinished lines and smudged graphite. One rainy afternoon, she found herself standing by the lake's edge, staring out over the water as raindrops danced on the surface. The air was thick with the scent of rain and mud, the trees shrouded in mist. She held the watch in her hand, feeling its cool metal press against her palm, and thought about throwing it back into the lake's depths, letting it sink beneath the surface where it might rest undisturbed once more. But she hesitated, unable to let go of the connection it represented, the fragile thread that still tied her to the mystery she had yet to unravel. Instead, she slipped it back into her pocket and walked the familiar trails, her thoughts drifting like the mist that swirled around the trees. The distance between them remained, an unbridgeable gap that seemed to widen with every unanswered question, with every step that took her further into the solitude of her own thoughts. And yet, even as she felt the ache of that distance, she could not shake the sense that something waited for her, hidden in the folds of time. A truth that might one day come into focus if she continued her search. Back in her apartment, she laid the watch on her desk and turned it over one last time, running her thumb over the initials. She sat in the lamplight, staring at its face, at the tiny scratches that marred the glass. Outside, the rain continued to fall, a steady rhythm that filled the silence. She listened to the sound of it, letting it wash over her, feeling the weight of the unanswered questions settle into the corners of her mind. The distance between them remained, but in the quiet of that moment, she found a strange comfort in the knowledge that she was not yet ready to let it go. Chapter 9. Promises in the Dark. Isabel's search for answers continued in small, persistent ways, like the drip of water carving a path through stone. She found herself returning to old places, bookstores where the dust gathered thick on forgotten shelves, antique shops with glass cases filled with relics of the past, and the hidden corners of the city where history lingered like a shadow. She carried the pocket watch with her always, tucked safely in her coat pocket, feeling its weight against her as a reminder of the puzzle she could not yet solve. Her walks through the city often led her back to the old library, a place she had visited as a child, where the scent of aging paper mingled with the faint scent of floor polish. The wooden floors creaked underfoot as she wandered among the stacks, trailing her fingers along the spines of books that bore titles she couldn't decipher. She searched for records, archives, anything that might give her a name to match the initials engraved on the watch. But the search always led her back to the same dead ends. The records faded and incomplete, the details lost to time. One afternoon, as the winter light slanted through the high windows of the library, she stumbled upon a shelf filled with old letters, their edges yellowed and brittle. Each letter was tied with a faded ribbon, the ink on the envelopes smudged and barely legible. She spent hours sifting through them, her hands careful as she unfolded each one, reading the stories of people long gone, stories of love and loss, of promises made and broken. The letters felt like a window into a world that had passed her by, a world where people had written out their hopes and fears by hand, sealing them with wax and sending them out into the unknown. One letter, in particular, caught her attention. It was tucked between a stack of unopened envelopes, its paper delicate and creased with age. The handwriting was neat but hesitant, the words pinned with the uncertainty of someone unsure if their message would ever reach its intended recipient. As she read the lines, a chill ran down her spine. The words spoke of a love that had been lost, of a promise made beside a lake, beneath the shadow of an ancient oak. The letter's author had written of a pocket watch, given as a token, with initials engraved on its back, initials that matched those on the watch she had found. The realization struck her like a wave, washing over her and leaving her breathless. The story in the letter was eerily similar to her own, the details aligning too closely to be mere coincidence. She reread the lines, tracing the faded ink with her fingertips, feeling as if she were holding a piece of someone else's life in her hands. The letter's final words spoke of hope, of a wish for reunion, though the tone was tinged with a quiet resignation, as if the author had known, even then, that time might not be on their side. Isabel clutched the letter to her chest, her mind spinning with the possibilities it presented. Had the stranger in the park been the one who wrote these words, or had he been the one they were meant for? She imagined him finding the letter too late, reading its contents with the same sense of longing that now filled her, wondering what might have been if fate had not kept them apart. She imagined him carrying that weight with him, wandering the city's hidden corners, leaving the watch behind as a final gesture of surrender to the mystery he could not solve. The rain began to fall outside, pattering softly against the library windows. Isabel tucked the letter carefully into her coat pocket, alongside the watch, and left the library, her footsteps quickening as she made her way through the wet streets. Her mind raced with thoughts of what this discovery might mean, how it might change the course of her search. She felt as though she had been given a glimpse into another life, one that mirrored her own in ways she couldn't fully understand. Back in her apartment, she spread the letter out on her desk, next to the dismantled pieces of the watch. She studied them both in the lamplight, comparing the handwriting on the letter to the delicate etching on the watch's back. Her fingers trembled as she placed the two side by side, feeling as if she were on the edge of uncovering a truth that had eluded her for months. The letter's final words echoed in her mind, mingling with the sound of the rain outside. a refrain that she couldn't quite silence. That night, she dreamed of the lake. In her dream, the water was calm and glassy, reflecting the stars above like a mirror. She walked along the shore, the pocket watch clutched in her hand, the letter folded against her heart. She felt the presence of someone just beyond her vision, a shadow moving through the trees, a figure that seemed both familiar and distant. She called out to the darkness, but the figure only drifted further away, fading into the mist that gathered over the water. When she awoke, she lay in the gray light of dawn, the dream's lingering chill settling into her bones. She rose, dressed in silence, and went to the window, watching the rain-soaked city come to life below. The distance between her and the stranger felt sharper now, as if the discovery of the letter had somehow brought them closer while also pushing them further apart. She wondered if he too had found the letter, if he had stood in this same spot, feeling the weight of time press down upon him. She spent the next few days tracing the letter's origins, visiting the library again and again, hoping to find a name or a date that might connect her to the people who had written those words. But the records remained elusive, their details blurred and incomplete. The library's staff, though kind, could offer little assistance, their faces politely puzzled as they watched her comb through the archives with a growing sense of urgency. One evening, as she was leaving the library, she noticed a small, unmarked envelope tucked beneath her door. Inside was a single slip of paper, bearing an address written in the same careful script as the letter. Her breath caught as she read the address. It led to a building on the edge of the city, in a neighborhood she had never visited. She felt a thrill of anticipation mingle with a sense of foreboding, wondering who might have left the message and what she might find if she chose to follow it. She set out the next morning, the pocket watch ticking softly in her coat pocket, the address clutched in her hand. The city's streets blurred past her, their familiar landmarks fading as she moved deeper into unknown territory. The building she sought was a weathered brownstone, its facade marked by years of rain and wind, its windows darkened and opaque. She stood before the door, her heart pounding, feeling as if she had arrived at the threshold of something that could not be undone. Isabel hesitated, staring up at the building, feeling the weight of the watch pressing against her chest. The rain began to fall again, gentle at first, then harder, drumming against the cobblestones beneath her feet. She took a deep breath and reached for the door, feeling the cool metal of the handle beneath her palm. As she pushed the door open, the shadows inside seemed to rush out to meet her, swallowing the light of the gray morning and drawing her into their depths. She stepped inside, her pulse quickening, and let the door close behind her with a soft click. The space within was dark and still, the air thick with the scent of dust and old wood. She could hear the rain outside, muffled and distant, as she moved further into the building, her footsteps echoing softly against the floorboards. The hallway stretched before her, lined with old photographs and faded wallpaper, each step taking her deeper into a past that she had not lived but now found herself bound to. As she walked, the distance between her and the stranger felt as if it had collapsed, drawing her closer to a revelation she could not yet name. She felt the weight of all the unanswered questions settle into her bones, but beneath that heaviness, there was a glimmer of something else, something that might be hope, or perhaps the final note of a melody that had haunted her for so long. And though she did not know what she would find at the end of the hallway, she kept moving forward, letting the shadows guide her into the unknown. Chapter 10. When the rain fell. As Isabel stepped deeper into the brownstone, she felt an almost electric energy in the air, as if the walls themselves were charged with secrets waiting to be uncovered. Each step echoed with the stories of those who had come before her, their laughter and sorrows whispering through the air like a haunting refrain. The dim light struggled to penetrate the shadows, casting elongated shapes that danced across the floor, teasing her with the promise of discovery. The hallway opened up into a spacious room, its high ceilings adorned with intricate plasterwork. Dust motes floated in the shafts of light streaming through the grimy windows, and Isabel was momentarily transfixed by the beauty of the space, despite its decay. Antique furniture sat haphazardly, covered with sheets that had yellowed with age, their outlines reminiscent of a forgotten past. A grand piano stood silently in the corner, its keys gleaming faintly, as if waiting for the touch of a hand to awaken it. Isabel's heart raced as she moved closer to the piano, her fingers brushing the surface of the sheet. She could almost hear the echoes of music that had once filled the room, the notes drifting through the air like a sweet memory. The watch in her pocket felt warm against her skin, urging her onward, a constant reminder of the connection she felt to the story unfolding before her. Exploring further, Isabel ventured toward the tall bookcase that lined one wall, its shelves sagging under the weight of dusty tomes. She reached for a book at random. The spine cracked, its title faded. As she opened it, a flurry of letters slipped out, fluttering to the floor like autumn leaves. She knelt to collect them, feeling a thrill of excitement wash over her as she realized they were similar to the one she had found in the library, each one a fragment of a life once lived, a whisper of the heart. As she began to read, she discovered tales of love, longing, and loss, all pinned with a fervor that transcended time. Each letter told a story, painting a vivid picture of relationships forged in moments of joy and marred by heartache. One letter, in particular, drew her in, its words weaving a narrative that mirrored her own journey. Two souls intertwined by fate, separated by circumstance, and forever marked by the love they had shared. Her fingers trembled as she held the letter, absorbing the words as if they were a lifeline. The author wrote of a promise made under the stars, of dreams they had spun together, only to be unraveled by the cruel hands of time. The emotion poured from the page, each line echoing her own feelings of despair and hope. She felt as if she were standing at the edge of a precipice, teetering between the past and the present, unsure which way to turn. Isabel spent what felt like hours sifting through the letters, losing herself in their stories. With each one, she felt the distance to the stranger shrink, her heart pounding in time with the rhythm of the tales being shared. The connections she made were visceral. She could almost see the faces of the people who had written them, their smiles and tears etched into her memory. Finally, she came across a letter signed with initials that sent a jolt of recognition through her. They matched those on the pocket watch. Isabel's breath caught in her throat as she carefully unfolded the fragile paper, her heart racing as she read the opening lines. The author poured their heart out, recounting their deep love and the pain of separation. The letter was laced with hope, but tinged with an underlying sadness that made Isabel's chest ache. The writer spoke of a meeting at the lake, the same one described in the letter she had found at the library. The memories spilled forth, painting vivid images in her mind. The gentle rustle of leaves, the sound of water lapping against the shore, and the warmth of a shared glance. She could almost hear the laughter that had once echoed in those sacred spaces, mingling with the sense of fresh blossoms and earth. As she continued reading, the story unfolded in layers, revealing the complexities of love, the beautiful moments intertwined with the bitter realities of life. Isabel felt as though she were eavesdropping on a sacred conversation, a testament to the endurance of love despite the trials that threatened to tear it apart. The words resonated with her own experiences, illuminating the paths she had traversed and the choices she had made. But as the final lines approached, the mood shifted. The letter turned darker, revealing the author's struggle against the constraints of society and familial expectations. The pain of unfulfilled promises hung heavy in the air, and Isabel could feel the writer's anguish as they spoke of dreams dashed against the rocks of reality. The emotion was palpable, each word pulling her deeper into the heart of the narrative. Finally, the letter ended with a plea for understanding, a wish that love could transcend time and distance, that it could find a way to bridge the chasm that had formed between two souls. Isabel folded the letter carefully, her heart racing as she considered the weight of its implications. Who had penned these words? And what had happened to them? The realization began to settle over her like a shroud. This was more than just a story of lost love. It was a reflection of her own journey, a mirror to the emotions she had felt for the stranger in the park. He, too, was bound by the chains of the past, perhaps seeking solace in the echoes of memories that still lingered in the corners of the city. In that moment of understanding, the watch vibrated gently in her pocket, a subtle reminder of the threads that connected her to him. She imagined him standing in a place much like this one, surrounded by fragments of his own story, searching for answers just as she was. It was a haunting thought, one that sent shivers down her spine, leaving her feeling both connected and utterly alone. With newfound resolve, Isabel stood up, the weight of the letters heavy in her hands. She needed to know more. She had to find out where this story led, where the lives of these people had taken them. She could feel the urgency growing within her, a fire ignited by the discovery of love lost but not forgotten. She moved through the room with purpose, her heart pounding with each step as she sought out more clues, more remnants of the lives that had unfolded within these walls. The brownstone felt alive, its very essence whispering to her, urging her to delve deeper into its mysteries. As she explored, she came across an old photograph propped up on a shelf, its frame cracked but still intact. The image showed a young couple by the lake, their faces radiant with joy, arms wrapped around each other as they gazed into the distance. Isabel's breath caught in her throat. It was a familiar sight, one that mirrored the dreams she had woven in her own heart. In that instant, she knew. This couple had lived the love that was now just a memory for so many others. The woman's laughter seemed to echo through time, a sweet sound that resonated in the very marrow of her bones. Isabel longed to reach out, to touch the photograph and feel the warmth of their happiness seep into her skin. But she hesitated, the weight of their joy pressing heavily against her heart. Time slipped by unnoticed as she continued her exploration, poring over every detail, seeking out more letters, more photographs, anything that would offer her a glimpse into the lives once lived in this house. Each discovery felt like a piece of a larger puzzle falling into place, and with each revelation, she found herself drawn closer to the truth she had been seeking. But as the daylight began to fade, the shadows in the room deepened, stretching out like fingers grasping at her. The atmosphere shifted, and Isabel felt a sense of urgency wash over her. She realized she could not linger here forever. She needed to leave and follow the threads that had woven this intricate tapestry of lives and loves. With the pocket watch and the letters carefully tucked away, she took one last look around the room, allowing herself to absorb the history that clung to the walls. It was a moment of bittersweet farewell, a promise to return, to uncover more of the stories hidden within these shadows. As she stepped back into the hallway, the weight of the past felt heavier on her shoulders, a burden she was both grateful for and terrified of. The truth was close now, the pieces of the puzzle falling into place as she prepared to step back into the world outside. Her heart raced with the anticipation of discovery, and with each step she took, she felt more alive than ever before. Isabel emerged into the cool evening air, the city bustling with life around her. The rain had stopped, leaving the streets glistening under the street lamps, and the scent of fresh earth filled her lungs. She felt invigorated, driven by a new purpose. The stranger was out there somewhere, and she needed to find him. She glanced down at the pocket watch, its ticking a reminder that time was both her ally and her adversary. Each tick echoed in her ears, and she could almost hear the distant melody of love and loss intertwined. With every beat of her heart, she felt the connections growing stronger, the invisible threads weaving their way toward a destination she had yet to fully comprehend. Isabel knew that this journey was not just about uncovering the past. It was about embracing the present and daring to forge a future unencumbered by the shadows of what had been. With renewed determination, she set out into the night, ready to follow the echoes of love that beckoned her onward, wherever they might lead. Chapter 11. The Distance Between Us. The night was alive with possibility as Isabel navigated the city streets, her heart beating in sync with the rhythm of the bustling world around her. Streetlights flickered like stars above, illuminating the path ahead and casting shadows that danced playfully along the cobblestones. Each step felt like a promise, an invitation to delve deeper into the unknown. Isabel clutched the pocket watch tightly in her hand, feeling its cool metal against her palm. It was a constant reminder of the man whose life had intertwined with hers in such unexpected ways. She could almost feel his presence beside her, a ghostly figure urging her onward, whispering secrets only she could hear. With every tick, the watch echoed the heartbeat of their shared destiny, and she felt more determined than ever to uncover the truth. As she walked, Isabel's thoughts drifted back to the letters she had read earlier. The poignant stories of love lost and found swirled in her mind, creating a vivid tapestry of emotions that tugged at her heartstrings. She could almost see the faces of those who had penned the words, faces filled with hope, yearning, and sometimes despair. Their stories resonated within her, fueling her desire to connect with the stranger she had seen in the park. The city seemed to shift around her, morphing into a living entity, alive with the history of countless souls who had walked these streets before her. Each corner she turned whispered tales of romance, loss, and the indelible mark left by love. It was intoxicating, and Isabel drank it in, the energy revitalizing her spirit. As she approached the park where they had first met, her heart quickened. The moon hung low in the sky, casting a silvery glow over the landscape. The trees stood tall and proud, their leaves rustling softly in the gentle breeze. Isabel paused for a moment, taking in the beauty of the scene before her. This place held memories of their fleeting encounter, and she could almost hear the echoes of laughter carried on the wind. She wandered along the familiar path, her mind racing with possibilities. Would he return? Would he be searching for her as she was for him? Each heartbeat felt like a question unanswered, a thread dangling in the fabric of their shared story. She imagined him standing beneath the old oak tree, the one that had witnessed their brief connection, its gnarled branches reaching out like arms, welcoming them back into its embrace. As Isabel made her way deeper into the park, she noticed a flickering light in the distance. Intrigued, she followed it, her footsteps growing lighter with anticipation. The closer she got, the more the light transformed into a small gathering of people around a fire pit, their silhouettes dancing against the night sky. The atmosphere was warm and inviting, and for a moment, Isabel felt drawn to the energy emanating from the group. But something deeper called to her, a whisper from within urging her to continue her search for the stranger. She turned away from the light, feeling a strange sense of duty to follow the path that lay ahead, even if it led her deeper into the unknown. As she ventured further, the sounds of laughter and music faded into the background, replaced by the serene rustling of leaves and the distant chirping of crickets. The tranquility of the night enveloped her, creating a cocoon of solace. It was then that she spotted a small clearing up ahead, the moonlight spilling down like a spotlight, illuminating a lone bench that sat invitingly beneath a canopy of stars. Isabel felt a magnetic pull toward the bench, as if it were a beacon guiding her towards something greater. She approached it slowly, her heart pounding in her chest. There was something about the spot that felt significant, as if it had witnessed countless moments of intimacy and connection. She sat down, taking a deep breath as she absorbed the serenity of her surroundings. The air was crisp, carrying with it the sense of damp earth and blossoming flowers. Isabel closed her eyes, letting the stillness wash over her. She envisioned the stranger, imagining his features, the way his eyes sparkled with unspoken dreams and untold stories. She could almost hear his laughter mingling with the whispers of the night, and the ache of longing surged within her. In that moment, Isabel understood that she was not just seeking him. She was seeking herself, a part of her that had been dormant for far too long. The journey she embarked upon was not merely about love, but about rediscovering her own passions, dreams, and desires. She longed for a connection that transcended the mundane, a love that ignited her soul and left an indelible mark upon her heart. As she sat on the bench, she began to contemplate the life she had lived thus far, the decisions that had shaped her, the moments that had defined her. There had been joy, but also heartache, a tapestry woven with both light and shadow. Each thread represented a choice made, a risk taken, or a love lost. Isabel opened her eyes and gazed up at the stars scattered across the vast expanse of the sky. They twinkled like a million possibilities, each one a reminder that she was not alone in her search for meaning. The universe was alive with stories, and she was but one thread in the intricate weave of existence. Determined to take charge of her fate, Isabel stood from the bench, her spirit rekindled. She felt a newfound sense of purpose bubbling within her, an eagerness to pursue her desires and uncover the truth that awaited her. With every step she took away from the bench, she left behind the fears and doubts that had once held her captive. The journey was just beginning, and she would follow the path wherever it might lead. With the pocket watch in her hand and the letters tucked away safely in her bag, Isabel set forth into the night, ready to embrace the adventure that awaited her. The weight of uncertainty lingered in the air, but it no longer felt burdensome. Instead, it felt exhilarating. As she walked, Isabel allowed her mind to drift toward the possibilities that lay ahead. Would she find the stranger? Would they forge a connection that transcended the fleeting moments they had shared? The questions hung in the air like a shimmering veil, and with each stride, she moved closer to uncovering the answers. The streets transformed as she ventured deeper into the city, each turn revealing hidden corners adorned with street art, cafes, and little shops filled with treasures. The world felt alive, vibrant with colors and sounds, and Isabel was determined to explore it all. She longed to absorb every experience, to capture every moment and imprint them on her heart like the letters she had read. The journey unfolded like a book, page after page filled with intrigue and possibility. The city was a labyrinth, and she was both the seeker and the storyteller, eager to chart her course through its winding paths. Her heart raced with the thrill of adventure, the anticipation of what lay just around the corner. As she wandered, Isabel stumbled upon a quaint little bookstore, its window lined with books that beckoned to her like old friends. She felt a sudden urge to step inside, to immerse herself in the world of words and stories. The bell above the door chimed softly as she entered, and the comforting scent of paper and ink enveloped her like a warm hug. Isabel meandered through the narrow aisles, running her fingers along the spines of the books, each one a potential portal to another world. She felt a sense of belonging here, surrounded by the tales of countless authors who had poured their hearts into their words. The shelves felt like home, a sanctuary where she could lose herself for hours, exploring new realms and immersing herself in the lives of characters who echoed her own journey. In the corner of the store, she spotted a small table adorned with mismatched chairs. It seemed like the perfect place to sit and gather her thoughts. She made her way over, her heart still racing with excitement. As she settled into one of the chairs, Isabel opened her bag and pulled out the letters she had found, letting them spill out onto the table. The sight of them sent a thrill through her, a reminder of the journey she was on. As she sifted through the papers, she felt a sense of purpose washing over her. The stories were no longer just fragments of another's life. They were intertwined with her own, guiding her toward the connection she so desperately sought. Each letter became a compass, pointing her toward the heart of the stranger she had yet to meet. Isabel spent hours lost in the words, absorbing the stories and letting them inspire her. The more she read, the more determined she became to find the man from the park. With each tale of love and loss, she felt a deeper connection to him, as if their souls were already entwined in a dance that transcended time. As the hours slipped by, Isabel found herself lost in thought. She realized that the journey to find him was not just about love. It was about self-discovery, understanding her own heart, and reclaiming her dreams. The world was vast and filled with possibilities, and she would embrace it all. With renewed resolve, she stood up from the table, her heart pounding with anticipation. Isabel knew that this was not just an ordinary search. It was an awakening. She would seek out the stranger, and in doing so, she would discover herself. Leaving the bookstore, she stepped back into the night, the cool air refreshing against her skin. The city was alive, and she could feel the pulse of life around her, each heartbeat echoing her own. Isabel set forth into the evening, ready to embrace the unexpected twists and turns that lay ahead. Chapter 12. Memories on the Edge. As dawn broke over the horizon, painting the sky in hues of pink and gold, Isabel found herself standing at the edge of the city. The night had felt like an eternity, filled with dreams and uncertainties. But now, with the first light of day, she was ready to face whatever awaited her. The crisp morning air invigorated her, carrying the scent of blooming flowers and fresh dew, awakening her senses to the world around her. Her heart thrummed in rhythm with the promise of a new day. Isabel took a moment to breathe in the beauty surrounding her. The city lay before her, a tapestry of bustling streets and hidden corners waiting to be explored. She felt a sense of clarity wash over her, a growing conviction that today was the day she would uncover the truth about the stranger who had captivated her heart. Determined, she began her journey back into the heart of the city. The sun climbed higher, casting its warm glow over everything in its path, illuminating the cobblestone streets and glimmering off the windows of quaint cafes. Isabel felt a renewed sense of purpose as she ventured past familiar landmarks, each step echoing with anticipation. As she walked, her thoughts danced between the letters she had read and the fleeting moments shared with the stranger in the park. Each memory was a fragment of a larger puzzle, and she could almost feel the pieces coming together. The stories of love and longing she had absorbed the previous night had sparked a fire within her, igniting her determination to find him. In the midst of her thoughts, Isabel found herself drawn to a small flower shop nestled between two larger buildings. Its vibrant colors beckoned her closer, and the delicate scent of blossoms wafted through the open door, inviting her in. The shop was filled with an array of blooms, each more beautiful than the last. Isabel marveled at the flowers, their vibrant petals reaching toward the sunlight as if dancing with joy. She stepped inside, her senses awakening to the beauty surrounding her. The shopkeeper, a kind-faced woman with silver-streaked hair, smiled warmly as Isabel entered. She felt an unexpected sense of comfort, as though she had known this place for ages. Isabel wandered through the aisles, her fingers grazing the soft petals of roses, daisies, and lilies, each one telling a story of its own. In a moment of inspiration, she selected a bouquet of wildflowers, bright and untamed, mirroring the unpredictability of her own heart. The shopkeeper wrapped the blooms in delicate paper, and Isabel accepted the bouquet with gratitude. It felt like a token of her journey, a symbol of hope as she continued her search for the stranger. With the bouquet in hand, Isabel left the shop and resumed her walk through the city. The morning sunlight bathed her in warmth, and she felt a surge of confidence coursing through her veins. She would not just seek the stranger. She would invite him into her life, sharing the beauty she had discovered along the way. As she meandered through the streets, Isabel's heart raced with anticipation. She felt as though she was on the brink of something profound, and each step brought her closer to unraveling the mysteries that surrounded their connection. She envisioned herself finding him, the two of them sitting together in a cozy cafe, sharing stories and laughter as if no time had passed since their first encounter. After wandering through the city for a while, Isabel found herself back at the park. The morning light illuminated the familiar path, and she felt a sense of familiarity wash over her. She made her way to the old oak tree, the one that had witnessed their first meeting, its branches swaying gently in the breeze. The bench where they had shared glances was empty now, but she felt the echoes of their brief connection linger in the air. With her heart pounding, Isabel took a seat on the bench, cradling the bouquet of wildflowers in her lap. She gazed around, searching for any sign of him, any indication that their paths would cross again. The world seemed to slow down, each moment stretching into eternity as she waited, her breath catching in her throat with every rustle of leaves. Time passed slowly, and doubt began to creep in. What if he didn't come? What if their connection was meant to be a fleeting moment, nothing more than a spark that had already faded? Isabel shook her head, pushing the thoughts away. She reminded herself of the letters, the stories that had intertwined with her own. She believed there was more to their story, a thread that needed to be pulled. Just as she was about to lose hope, a figure appeared in the distance, strolling leisurely along the path. Her heart skipped a beat as she recognized him instantly. The stranger from the park, the man who had captured her imagination and ignited her soul. He walked with a relaxed grace, the sunlight catching his hair and making it shimmer like spun gold. Isabel's breath caught in her throat as she watched him approach. He seemed unaware of her presence, lost in thought as he strolled closer. But the moment he reached the old oak tree, he paused, his gaze shifting toward her, surprise flickering across his face. In that instant, time seemed to stand still. Isabel felt a rush of emotions flood her, a mixture of excitement and trepidation. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the culmination of her journey, the intersection of their paths once more. He approached slowly, his expression transforming from surprise to a warm smile that ignited a spark within her. The air crackled with unspoken words, and Isabel felt the weight of their shared experiences draw them closer together. Without thinking, she rose from the bench, the bouquet of wildflowers held tightly in her hands. As she stepped toward him, the beauty of the moment enveloped them. The world around them faded into the background, leaving only the two of them and the magnetic connection that had drawn them together once before. Isabel's heart raced as she drew closer, her mind swirling with all the things she wanted to say. But there were no words needed. The silence between them spoke volumes. In that fleeting moment, the weight of their individual journeys melted away, and they were left with the undeniable truth. Their paths were intertwined, and they were meant to be together. The stranger reached out, gently taking the bouquet from her hands, his touch sending shivers down her spine. He brought the flowers to his nose, inhaling their sweet fragrance with a look of delight. It was a small gesture, yet it held so much meaning, an acknowledgement of the bond they shared. Isabel watched as his eyes sparkled with warmth and curiosity, her heart swelling with hope. This was the beginning of something beautiful, a chance to explore the depths of their connection and discover the truth of their feelings. Together, they would unravel the mysteries of their hearts, forging a path toward love and understanding. As they stood beneath the oak tree, Isabel felt the weight of uncertainty lift. She was ready to embrace whatever lay ahead, knowing that this moment was just the beginning of their story. The sun rose higher in the sky, casting a warm glow over the park as Isabel and the stranger took their first steps together, embarking on a journey that would change their lives forever. Chapter 13: A Dance of Memories. As the sun dipped low on the horizon, casting long shadows across the park, Isabel and the stranger, whom she had come to know as Samuel, sat on the bench beneath the old oak tree, their hearts intertwined with the unspoken promise of a new beginning. The air around them was thick with anticipation, filled with the fragrance of wildflowers and the sounds of laughter from nearby children playing in the fading light. Samuel turned toward Isabel, his gaze steady and earnest, and she could see the warmth in his eyes mirrored in her own. In that moment, it felt as if the world around them faded away, leaving only the two of them suspended in a cocoon of shared emotions and silent understanding. Isabel's heart raced, filled with a mixture of excitement and fear. It was a dance of memories, the memories of their brief encounter, the letters that had ignited her passion for him, and the promise of what could be. As the shadows grew longer, the park transformed, and the golden hour bathed everything in a warm glow. Isabel took a deep breath, her mind racing with thoughts and emotions swirling within her. Samuel leaned back on the bench, a content smile gracing his lips as he gazed at the vibrant sunset painting the sky in breathtaking hues of orange and pink. Together, they watched the day transition into night, the beauty of the sunset mirroring the beauty of their burgeoning connection. In this sacred space, it felt as if they were the only two people in the world, connected by a thread of destiny that had drawn them together across time and space. As the sun sank lower, Isabel's thoughts drifted back to the letters, the words that had sparked a flame within her. Each letter had been a glimpse into Samuel's soul, revealing pieces of his life, dreams, and struggles. She recalled the way he had described his childhood in the countryside, the long summer days spent wandering through fields of wildflowers, and the nights spent gazing at the stars, dreaming of the future. His words resonated deeply with her own experiences, and she felt a sense of kinship with him. Isabel had also spent her childhood lost in dreams, wandering the halls of her family's old estate, filled with echoes of laughter and whispers of the past. She remembered how she would escape to the garden, where the roses bloomed abundantly, their sweet fragrance enveloping her like a warm embrace. Those moments had been a refuge, a place where she could dream of love and adventure. As she gazed at Samuel, a thought flickered in her mind. Perhaps their shared dreams had always been meant to converge, leading them to this very moment. She could see in him a reflection of herself, a kindred spirit who had also experienced loss, longing, and the quest for something more. Just then, a gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the oak tree, carrying with it a whisper of memories. Isabel felt the weight of the moment, the significance of their connection, and she could no longer contain her desire to delve deeper into Samuel's world. She wanted to know everything about him, the man behind the letters, the soul that resonated so harmoniously with hers. Turning toward him, she gestured toward the flowers he had accepted earlier. Samuel picked up the bouquet and inhaled their sweet fragrance, a smile breaking across his face. In that moment, Isabel felt a rush of warmth, a spark of joy illuminating her heart. Their bond was growing stronger with each passing second, and she couldn't help but feel a sense of destiny weaving its way through their lives. As twilight descended, the park began to change. The laughter of children faded, and the glow of street lamps illuminated the paths. Samuel stood and offered Isabel his hand. With a smile, she took it, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers. Together, they wandered through the park, hand in hand, exploring its hidden corners and reveling in the beauty of the night. They found themselves in a secluded area, surrounded by blossoming trees and soft grass that beckoned them to sit. Samuel spread a blanket on the ground, and they settled onto it, feeling the coolness of the earth beneath them. The night was alive with the sounds of crickets and the distant rustle of leaves, creating a soothing symphony that enveloped them. As they sat together, Isabel couldn't shake the feeling that they were creating a tapestry of memories, stitching their stories together into something beautiful. The stars began to twinkle above them, one by one emerging from the velvety sky, and Isabel felt a surge of inspiration coursing through her veins. She wanted to share her dreams with Samuel, to paint the canvas of their future together with vibrant colors of hope and love. With every glance at the stars, Isabel felt a connection to something greater. She spoke through her eyes, conveying the thoughts and feelings that swirled within her. Samuel returned her gaze, his expression softening as they exchanged unspoken words filled with understanding and longing. In that moment, Isabel's heart swelled with possibility. Together, they began to share stories, but not in words, in the way their eyes sparkled, the way their laughter danced in the air, and the way their souls intertwined in the silence that surrounded them. Isabel revealed her childhood memories, the dreams she had woven into the fabric of her life, the stories she longed to tell, and the adventures she wished to embark upon. Samuel, too, painted a picture of his past, sharing the passions that had driven him, the moments of triumph, and the shadows that had shaped his journey. As they exchanged these pieces of themselves, Isabel felt as if they were building a bridge that would span the chasm of their pasts. Their lives, once separate and solitary, were now intertwining, creating a shared narrative filled with promise and hope. The stars twinkled overhead, and Isabel felt a sense of magic enveloping them. They were two souls on a journey, navigating the complexities of life together, forging a connection that transcended time. She realized that their love story was not just about the past or the present. It was about the choices they would make moving forward, the adventures that awaited them, and the love that would guide them through the challenges that lay ahead. As the night deepened, they remained on the blanket, enveloped in the serenity of the moment. Time felt suspended, allowing them to savor each heartbeat, each breath, as they lost themselves in each other's company. Isabel knew that the journey was just beginning, and with Samuel by her side, she felt ready to face whatever awaited them. With a heart full of dreams and a spirit eager to embrace the unknown, Isabel nestled closer to Samuel, their shoulders touching, the warmth of their bodies igniting a flicker of hope within her. In that quiet moment, she knew that love was not just a destination. It was a journey, a dance of memories that would carry them through the stormy seas of life, guiding them home. Chapter 14. The Heart's Compass. The days melted into weeks, each one marked by the gentle rhythm of Isabel and Samuel's newfound connection. Their bond deepened as they explored the corners of their lives together, sharing moments of joy, vulnerability, and laughter. The city felt different now, brighter, filled with possibilities as they ventured through art galleries, cafes, and quiet parks, creating a world uniquely their own. Isabel often marveled at how Samuel seemed to instinctively know her soul. His presence was like a compass guiding her back to herself, reminding her of who she had always been beneath the layers of hurt and loss. With him, the wall she had carefully constructed began to crumble, allowing her to breathe freely for the first time in years. They spent countless afternoons in the art district, surrounded by vibrant murals and the intoxicating scent of fresh paint. Isabel found herself captivated by the creativity bursting from every corner, a stark contrast to the muted colors of her previous life. Samuel's passion for art drew her in, and together they lost themselves in the narratives told through brush strokes and canvas. One sunny afternoon, as they strolled through the bustling streets, Isabel spotted a quaint little art studio tucked away between two larger buildings. Intrigued, she tugged on Samuel's arm, urging him to follow her inside. The moment they stepped through the door, a wave of inspiration washed over them, igniting a fire in Isabel's heart. The studio was a sanctuary filled with the aroma of turpentine and the sight of colorful canvases splashed with life. Artists of all ages were scattered throughout the space, lost in their own worlds of creation. Some painted, others sculpted, while a few were deep in discussion, their voices blending into a harmonious symphony of creativity. Isabel felt a sense of belonging wash over her, a connection to something larger than herself, Samuel smiled at her enthusiasm, and they wandered from canvas to canvas, each piece stirring a different emotion within Isabel. They paused in front of a large abstract painting, a swirl of blues and greens, chaotic yet beautiful. Isabel felt an inexplicable pull toward it, as if it reflected the turmoil and beauty of her own heart. Samuel noticed her intense gaze and moved closer, standing beside her. He reached out, gently touching her shoulder, and Isabel felt a surge of warmth radiate from the contact. The connection was palpable, and she turned to him, their eyes meeting in a silent understanding that spoke volumes. It was moments like these, fleeting yet powerful, that solidified their bond, weaving their lives together with threads of shared passion. As the afternoon wore on, Isabel felt an urge to create. The thought bubbled up within her, demanding to be expressed. She glanced around the studio, spotting an empty easel in the corner, its pristine canvas waiting for an artist's touch. With an excited smile, she turned to Samuel, who nodded encouragingly. She approached the easel, her heart racing with anticipation. Samuel stood back, observing her as she gathered her materials, his presence a comforting reminder of the trust they had built. With each stroke of the brush, Isabel poured her soul onto the canvas. The colors flowed together, capturing her essence, the joy, the fear, the longing for something more. As she painted, she felt a sense of liberation wash over her, an awakening of the artist she had buried deep within. The vibrant hues danced across the canvas, telling a story that was uniquely hers. Samuel watched in awe, seeing the transformation unfold before him. Isabel was alive, her spirit ignited by the act of creation, and he could feel the beauty of the moment resonate in his own heart. Hours slipped by unnoticed as Isabel lost herself in the rhythm of painting, the world around her fading into a blur. With every brushstroke, she felt lighter, as if she were shedding the weight of her past. The canvas came alive under her hands, revealing a landscape of emotions that flowed from her heart. When she finally stepped back to admire her work, Isabel's breath caught in her throat. The painting was a reflection of her journey, a vibrant tapestry of colors that symbolized hope, love, and resilience. It was a piece of her heart captured in time, a testament to her growth and the transformative power of love. Samuel approached, his eyes wide with admiration. He didn't need words to express what he felt. His gaze conveyed everything. In that moment, Isabel knew that he saw her. Not just the woman who had endured loss, but the artist, the dreamer, the lover of life. As they left the studio, hand in hand, Isabel felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude. Their journey together had become a dance of discovery, each step revealing new facets of their hearts. Samuel had not only unlocked her passion for art, but had also reignited the flames of hope that had flickered in the darkness. That evening, they wandered through the streets, the city illuminated by a soft glow as the sun dipped below the horizon. The air was filled with the sounds of laughter and music, a celebration of life that resonated in their hearts. They found a small cafe with outdoor seating and settled at a table under twinkling fairy lights. The evening breeze caressed their skin as they shared stories and dreams, laughter bubbling between them like the wine they sipped. Isabel felt a sense of belonging that she had longed for, a connection that transcended the physical realm. In Samuel's presence, she was no longer defined by her past, but rather embraced by the possibilities of the future. As the night deepened, Isabel felt a stirring within her, a sense of inevitability. The spark of love had ignited, yet an underlying fear began to creep in. What if this happiness was fleeting? What if their love was a mere illusion, bound to shatter like glass? She pushed the thought away, willing herself to focus on the moment, the magic that had enveloped them. But in the back of her mind, the questions lingered like shadows, threatening to cloud her newfound joy. She watched as Samuel laughed, his eyes sparkling with life, and she felt the warmth of his hand resting on hers. In that instant, she knew that love was a risk, but one she was willing to take. With Samuel by her side, Isabel resolved to face whatever challenges lay ahead. Their journey was still unfolding, a tapestry of emotions woven together by the threads of love, hope, and resilience. As they walked home under the starlit sky, Isabel felt a sense of peace settle within her. Yet, unbeknownst to her, the winds of fate were beginning to shift, preparing to unveil truths that would test their bond in ways they could never have imagined. Chapter 15. When Goodbye Came. As the days stretched into weeks, Isabel and Samuel continued to weave their lives together, navigating the intricacies of love with an ease that surprised them both. Each moment spent together felt like an intimate dance, a delicate balance of laughter, shared dreams, and whispered hopes. Isabel found herself captivated not only by Samuel's kindness, but by the way he seemed to understand her deepest fears and aspirations without her ever having to voice them. Their bond grew stronger, blossoming like the flowers that adorned the city's parks. They took long walks under the dappled sunlight, explored hidden corners of the city, and indulged in late-night conversations that stretched into the early hours. Samuel's laughter became the melody of her life, and Isabel reveled in the warmth of his affection, feeling more alive than she had in years. However, as summer began to fade into autumn, a subtle change drifted through the air. The leaves, once vibrant green, started to blush in hues of amber and crimson, signaling a shift not just in the season but within Isabel herself. The lingering shadows of her past returned, whispering doubts that curled around her heart like tendrils of smoke. Though she tried to dismiss these insecurities, they clawed at her mind, bringing with them memories of heartache and loss. Each time she saw Samuel's infectious smile, a flicker of fear ignited within her, a fear of losing him, of watching their love dissipate like the summer warmth. How could she protect herself from the inevitable ache of loss that had once consumed her? One crisp evening, as they strolled through the park, Isabel watched the sun dip below the horizon, painting the sky in vibrant streaks of orange and purple. The beauty was almost surreal, yet she felt a sense of foreboding settle within her. The fading light mirrored her own fading sense of security. Samuel walked beside her, oblivious to the storm brewing inside her heart. They reached a secluded spot, a small clearing framed by towering trees. Samuel turned to her, his eyes searching hers for some unspoken truth. Isabel felt a pang in her chest, a mix of desire and dread. She wanted to tell him everything, to share the chaos swirling in her mind. Yet the words remained trapped within her. Instead, she focused on the beauty around them, the sounds of nature enveloping them in a gentle embrace. The air was rich with the scent of earth and leaves, a reminder of the cyclical nature of life, how seasons changed and time flowed, unrelenting and indifferent. She took a deep breath, hoping to ground herself in the present, but the weight of her worries persisted. As night fell, they sat on a bench beneath the stars, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. Samuel leaned back, his gaze fixed on the sky, while Isabel felt the tension inside her mount. She yearned to reach out, to connect, but her fears held her back like chains. What if she allowed herself to love him fully, only to have it slip away like grains of sand? Days turned into weeks, and the autumn chill began to settle into the air. With each passing moment, Isabel felt the distance between them grow, a chasm created by her unvoiced fears. Samuel noticed the change, his warmth and affection unwavering. Yet the shadows that clouded Isabel's heart cast a pall over their once vibrant connection. One rainy afternoon, Isabel found herself in a quaint cafe, sitting at a corner table with a book that lay forgotten in her hands. Outside, raindrops danced against the window, creating a blurred landscape of the world beyond. The cafe was filled with the comforting aroma of coffee and pastries, yet the atmosphere felt heavy with the weight of her thoughts. She couldn't shake the feeling that their love was on the brink of collapse. What if Samuel realized she was broken? What if he saw the cracks that marred her heart? The questions spiraled in her mind, echoing louder with each passing day. Samuel arrived, shaking off the rain from his umbrella, his smile illuminating the dim cafe. Yet, even as he approached, Isabel felt the gulf between them deepen. He sat across from her, and for the first time, she struggled to meet his gaze. Instead of the usual warmth she felt in his presence, a chill swept through her, wrapping around her like a shroud. They spent the afternoon together, sharing laughter and stories, but Isabel felt as if she were merely going through the motions. As Samuel spoke, she caught glimpses of the worry in his eyes. He was perceptive, sensing the walls she had erected around her heart. Each smile he offered felt like a lifeline thrown into turbulent waters, yet she could only cling to her fears. Days turned into a blurred cycle of joy tinged with sorrow. Samuel remained patient, his love unwavering despite Isabel's retreat. He continued to invite her to art shows, weekend getaways, and quiet evenings under the stars, hoping to draw her out of her shell. Yet, with every passing moment, Isabel felt the strain of her own heart, the chasm widening, threatening to swallow her whole. As winter approached, the landscape transformed into a breathtaking wonderland, with snow blanketing the ground like a soft, white veil. The world outside became a serene escape. Yet Isabel found herself trapped in a tempest of emotions. The cold weather mirrored her internal struggle, the icy tendrils of fear wrapping around her heart, squeezing tighter with every shared moment. Samuel suggested a weekend getaway to a cozy cabin in the mountains, believing that the change of scenery might help rekindle their connection. Isabel hesitated, torn between the longing to be with him and the fear of confronting the truth lurking within her heart. But the thought of losing him drove her to agree, hoping that perhaps a break from their routine would provide clarity. They arrived at the cabin, nestled among towering pines, the scent of wood smoke mingling with the crisp, cold air. The beauty of their surroundings was breathtaking. Yet Isabel felt as if she were suffocating in her own thoughts. Samuel set about making the space warm and inviting, lighting a fire that crackled and danced in the fireplace, casting flickering shadows around the room. As the evening wore on, they settled into a comfortable routine, sharing meals and enjoying each other's company. Yet, the tension hung in the air, thick and palpable. Isabel found it increasingly difficult to let her guard down, the fear of vulnerability holding her hostage. One quiet night, as they sat together by the fire, Isabel felt the warmth radiating from Samuel, the way he looked at her with such tenderness. Yet, a wave of panic surged through her, threatening to drown her in despair. She could no longer ignore the truth that lay beneath the surface, the fear that their love was destined to be fleeting, a momentary spark in the vast darkness of life. Suddenly, in the midst of the quiet intimacy, Isabel felt the weight of her silence suffocating. As Samuel spoke of their dreams and future, her heart raced, torn between the desire to be with him and the crippling fear of loss. The world outside faded into oblivion as she confronted the very essence of her heart. Was she willing to risk everything for a love that could vanish like the morning mist? In a moment of desperation, Isabel rose from her seat, retreating into the shadows of the cabin. Samuel watched her go, confusion and concern etched across his face. The flickering fire illuminated the room, casting a warm glow that felt miles away from the turmoil brewing within her. She stepped outside into the cold night, the crisp air biting at her skin. In the stillness of the night, Isabel looked up at the stars, the vastness of the universe reflecting the chaos within her heart. The beauty was overwhelming, yet it served as a stark reminder of how insignificant she felt in the grand scheme of things. The doubts and fears clawed at her insides, whispering venomous thoughts that threatened to swallow her whole. She stood alone, the chill seeping into her bones, wrestling with the reality of what she felt for Samuel. She longed for his love, yet the very thought of fully embracing it terrified her. What if he left? What if this was all a fleeting illusion, a moment destined to end in heartbreak? In that moment of uncertainty, Isabel made a decision that would alter the course of their lives. The ache in her heart screamed for freedom, a desperate need to confront her fears and embrace the love she had been given. She turned to re-enter the cabin, her resolve strengthening with each step. As she crossed the threshold, she saw Samuel standing by the fire, his face illuminated by the warm glow. The concern in his eyes was evident as he took a step towards her, reaching out a hand as if to pull her from the abyss of her thoughts. Isabel took a deep breath, preparing to lay bare the turmoil she had kept hidden for so long. But before she could find the words, Samuel's expression shifted, a flicker of something dark clouding his features. It was as if the warmth in the room had suddenly vanished, replaced by a palpable tension that enveloped them. In that fleeting moment, Isabel realized that the very fear she had struggled with was echoed in Samuel's gaze. He, too, was wrestling with uncertainties, and it struck her like a bolt of lightning. She was not alone in her fears. But before she could voice her thoughts, a loud crash echoed outside, breaking the fragile moment. They turned simultaneously towards the sound, and as Isabel's heart raced, she saw shadows moving in the darkness beyond the cabin's windows. In an instant, the serenity of their getaway shattered. The reality of their situation came crashing down, and as the shadows approached, Isabel felt the weight of her decisions become unbearable. Their love, once a sanctuary, now felt like a fragile thread in the face of an encroaching storm. Samuel stepped closer, the tension in the room palpable. The world outside was changing, and the echoes of tomorrow were closing in, leaving Isabel to grapple with the truth of her heart in a moment that would redefine everything.